Well, James Thurman, welcome to Eureka Report. Thanks for joining us. Now, perhaps we could just start with a bit of the history of your company, started by Alan Kohler and Carl Wood.
That's right.
Australia's pioneers of IVF. Tell us about the journey from them, basically creating the world's first IVF pregnancy in 1973 to where you are now. What's the journey been?
The group is in fact a group of great pedigree, if I can put it that way. So as you've outlined, the group achieved the world's first pregnancy back in 1973, and since those heady days we've been very much at the forefront of innovation and improvements in fertility care. And in fact, if you look at the years post 1973, even up until today, the company's had if you like, an honour roll of both world and Australian firsts, including.
But back in '73, those guys, Trounston and Wood, were just researchers at Monash University, right?
Well, they were practising clinicians as well. So Alan Trounston was the scientist of the day, and Carl Wood was indeed a practising medico. And what they did is they brought their ideas together, and this was in the very heady days of obstetrics and fertility care back in the early 70s, and quite controversial as well.
Yeah, I remember it well. It was terribly controversial, but of course it wasn't a company then, was it? It wasn't like earning revenue as a business. When did it become a business?
So it became a business in probably the early 80s, when Monash University became quite involved in both Alan and Carl's work. And Monash University effectively corporatised or commercialised that work. And what happened is, I think that was quite successful for the university.
And did Monash Uni own 100% of it when it was created?
Right. They did. They subsequently sold a portion of the company to about half a dozen, maybe 8 doctors who later became involved in this work, in this fertility work.
At what point did Monash and those doctors, or Monash perhaps, just sell to Ironbridge? How did the business get to Ironbridge Capital, the private equity firm?
Well, what happened is after Monash University sold 50% of the business to the doctors, it then took a decision to divest itself entirely, and in probably the mid-90s, maybe a little bit later, sold to a private equity group called ABN AMRO, which you'll be familiar with. What happened then was we bumped into the global financial crisis, and ABN AMRO began divesting itself of a number of its assets, particularly here in Australia. And what happened as part of that process is ABN AMRO sold its share to Ironbridge Capital. So
let's talk about the business now. How many fertility treatments do you perform each year?
We undertake about just over 8,000 IVF cycles, and that's across our network of 18 clinics here in Australia.
And what do they cost?
An IVF cycle is in the order of $10,000. That's the headline price. But we are lucky in this country that the government, through the Medicare scheme and something called the Extended Medicare Safety Net, funds about 65% of the cost of an IVF cycle. So the out-of-pocket cost for a patient...
For everybody?
For everybody.
Right.
For everybody. So the out-of-pocket cost for a patient is about $3,500.
And at what rate is IVF growing in Australia, and what sort of things influence that growth?
So what's driving that growth?
Well, firstly, what is the growth? What's been the growth?
The growth is 3 to 4% increase per annum over the last few years in patient treatment volumes, if I can use that term. And that's being driven by a few things. It's being driven by an ageing female population. So if we look at changing social trends, women are staying in the workforce longer, they're staying in the education system longer. It's costing more and more to buy a house, so they're leaving having children till later in life, to the extent that the age of women having their first child in Australia is almost 31 years of age. The age of patients, the average age of patients coming through our clinics is 37 years of age, and 1 in 4 of our patients is aged 40 or over. One child in every Australian classroom now is an IVF child, so about one child in 25. That's the level of penetration, if you will, of IVF services.
And is that growth rate of 3 to 4% accelerating?
It's stayed pretty stable over the last several years, and our view is that 3 to 4% trajectory is what we'll see over the next several years.
And is your profit margin stable as well?
So we do margins in the mid-30s, and that's been stable over the last several years as well.
And is there anything you can do to increase that, or anything you want to do to increase that margin?
Well, we're an organisation, we're a fertility care provider which has a reputation for technology and innovation. And one of the things that we've introduced over recent years is something called pre-implantation genetic screening. And this is where we're able to look at, if you like, look under the hood of the embryos that we're creating to determine which embryos are chromosomally balanced and hence which are most likely to go through to a full-term pregnancy. So this is a technology which has only been available to our patients for the last 18 months. And this is driving improvements in pregnancy success rates, but it's also driving revenue and profitability. And we've seen very strong take-up of this technology over the last 12 months or so.
I suppose there's an ethical limit to how far you can take pre-plantation genetic screening?
Well, look, we'll never be able to screen for whether a child is going to have blue eyes or blonde hair, but what we're able to screen is the robustness, if I can put it that way, of the embryo, and hence the likelihood that it will go through to a full healthy pregnancy, and clearly that's what our patients are looking for.
Yeah, so is that screening increasing your success rate measurably that you can see now?
It is. And I mean, we tend to look at our success rates as the gold standard, if you like, as we look at patients aged 38 and under, and our success rates across the group are in the order of 38-39%. What we're seeing with the take-up of this pre-implantation genetic screening technology is those success rates are increasing incrementally.